Alison, I'm reading your book. You'll be glad to know as you sent it to me. and I've come across, I know this will point me out that I'm only up to chapter 2, but I've come across some terms in here and I really want to have a chat with you about them, and I want to use that on the course. So it's brain reserve, cognitive reserve, social reserve, and emotional reserve. And some of those I'm familiar with and some of those I'm not familiar with. So I wondered if we could have a chat about them and just see where we get to.
Sure, that's no problem. So the first thing to say is that brain reserve and social reserve have been around as ideas for a long time, whereas social reserve and emotional reserve are ideas that I've invented. So that's the first thing to say. So if you look in other books to find about social reserve and emotional reserve, you won't find that yet. So hopefully in due course, people will pick up on it. So basically, when we talk about reserve, we're not talking about being reserved, like being, shy or anything like that. It's not that kind of reserve. It's reserve more like the bank's reserves. You've got something in reserve to help you, to back you up. And so when we talk about brain reserve, we're talking about the extent to which a person's actual brain material is connected up in such a way that it would mean that if that person got a dementia-causing disease, which is a brain disease, if they got that disease, how quickly would it affect them? Would their brain be able to cope with it, because it's like got lots of different ways of getting from A to B, lots of different connections, and they're nice and strong. So the little bit of damage to the cells wouldn't necessarily have a massive effect very quickly. And people vary in the amount of brain reserve that they have. And you can actually see that in scans and so on. You can see, how differently people's brains are set up and so on. So that's the first, that's brain reserve.
You know what I'm thinking, Alison? I'm thinking of Robin Williams in terms of brain reserve, because from what I've read about him, the extent of his damage, pathologists had never seen so much damage in the brain, and he was still functioning, and up until like a year before, he was still acting. So I'm just thinking he was a genius.
Yeah.
So in terms of brain reserve, I've got it in my head now. I'm thinking Robin Williams was able to live with a really, extensive dementia, Lewy body dementia, for quite a while, and still be acting and still be functioning, because of his brain was big and, he was a genius. Would you agree with that?
That's definitely there's been various research reports of people who you do an autopsy on their brain after they've died, and you discover that their whole brain is full of this brain disease that should have caused them to have Alzheimer's or something, and they just didn't show any symptoms. And that we would say is brain reserve.
Okay.
So then cognitive reserve. Now cognition is about the way we use our brain. So it's not about the hardware, it's about the software, if you like. So in cognitive reserve, what we're talking about is if somebody did get some brain disease that was likely to cause dementia, how do they use their brain such that it will make the effects of that show earlier versus later? So typically people who are used to thinking around problems in different kinds of ways, different ways of expressing themselves, interested in taking, different routes from A to B, this kind of thing, where you're kind of challenging your brain all the time to kind of to use its facilities, use all the networks that the hardware is giving you. People like that seem to be able to resist showing the symptoms or the symptoms getting as bad for a bit longer. And that's because if there's like a little route way for getting a job done in your brain that gets blocked, they've got another way they can go, and they're used to doing that. It is a bit like if you were driving along the road. It doesn't matter how good your road network is, how many different roads there are. If you only ever drive down one road and you've never tried any of the other routes, then you're really going to struggle to find another route if that road's blocked. So people who are used to driving lots of different ways around the road network are better supported. So that's what cognitive reserve means, and it's very strongly linked to education. We don't know exactly why. It could be that the longer you stay in education, the more you learn how to use your brain in a particular way. That kind of makes sense. But there could be other explanations for it as well. For example, that people are more fundamentally different in how they use their brains, and that if you use your brain in certain kinds of way, you're more likely to be successful at school, and therefore more likely to stay on for longer and get more education. So it could be that, we don't really know.
Okay, so from that, I'm thinking, if you've sort of got the confidence and the curiosity to try different routes, that helps me understand cognitive reserve. So that's, you know, I've got the confidence. I know there's some different routes. I'm going to just try it out. You know, I'm pushing myself out of my comfort zone. So that's sort of, for me, cognitive reserve.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
so
then we have your reserves.
Yeah, okay. So really what was happening here was I was thinking that, you know, so much of the research is focused on the brain and dementia, and on how people respond to tests in dementia. And there's a lot less sort of hard-nosed research, if you like, on the other aspects of what it's like to be living with a dementia or supporting somebody who is. But we have to say that people vary in how bad their dementia gets, not just on the basis of how their brain is or how they use their brain, but also a whole load of other things, such as how they feel and how other people behave towards them. And so that's what I wanted to capture with these two reserves. So let's start with emotional reserve. Can I do that? Because that's kind of a bit simpler, because social reserves have got more parts to it. Emotional reserve is really about how resilient you are in yourself when things are going badly. Now, we can all have bad days, we can all feel terrible, bad things happen to us and so on. Some people can pick themselves up fairly well, others get really knocked down very quickly for a long time. And we can call this, if you like, their emotional reserve. How much are they able to draw on their own inner resources to say, that's a really bad day, but it doesn't mean the rest of my life is bad, or tomorrow will be a bit better, or I'm still grateful for this or that, whatever. There are lots of different tricks that we can all use to kind of build our emotional reserve, so we're a bit more resilient when things go wrong and it doesn't knock us down for quite so long.
I think of that one as bounceability.
Bounceability, so I think is great.
It's like a ball coming along, so you can go down. So there's a line here, you can drop down, but you will bounce back above that line, and it's sort of generally you stay above the line, and you know, if you go down, you do quickly bounce back up. And I see that, you know, I see people who have more bounceability than others who perhaps are a bit lower and below the line, and just you can see that in their mood and how they deal with you know, life's challenges.
Exactly. We can never prevent the ball going below the line sometimes, because life just does that to you. You know, things are going to happen that give you a really bad day. And we don't in ourselves have total control, I think, over how bouncy we are. You know, I don't think you can just say to somebody, oh, be more bouncy. I don't think that, it isn't like that. We're all very complicated, and we all have all sorts of fears and hopes and so on. Some people just naturally more bouncy than others, but there are little techniques you can use that will help, like, you know, thinking positively and getting out and getting your exercise and eating well. These kinds of things I think can help your mood. But the key thing I think that can really help build people's emotional reserve is making sure they have enough social reserves, which is why I wanted to come to it afterwards, because this is the one I think where we have most agency. And it's not just people with dementia themselves or family or professional carers, it's everybody. Everybody has to be involved in building social reserve. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is the environment that we operate in day by day can have a massive effect on how we feel about ourselves, and how whether we feel that we can solve problems and get on with our lives or not, how defeated we are by things. And we all know what this is like. It's whether somebody smiles at you in the shop, whether somebody is horrible to you or shouts at you from a car or something. All of these things can really affect our mood. And if we're already feeling quite vulnerable, they can affect us really badly. Now, people who are living with dementia have got so much stuff going on, so many challenges, the last thing they need, if they're taking a little bit longer to pay for something in the shop, is to have somebody behind them stamping their foot and saying, oh, will you get a move on, and everything. And so, you know, where's the problem there? It's not the person with dementia who's doing their best. It's the person behind who isn't understanding that their behavior can really wreck somebody's day. They're not really thinking at all. They're not meaning necessarily to be horrible. They're just in their own little world and doing their own thing. And we have to educate ordinary people to take more notice of the needs that other people have around them, whether it's a person living with dementia, whether it's a family carer who's on their last legs running around trying to do things, or whether it's anybody with any other kind of challenge that's nothing to do with dementia. It's just being aware that our behavior day by day, minute by minute, can make a difference to how somebody else feels, and we can actually do something about that. So that's one aspect. That's about people's attitudes towards others, how much they notice that there is a problem, and then what they think when they realize what that problem is. Oh, that person's got dementia. Oh, I'll stay away from them. My neighbor's got dementia. I'll hide behind the hedge when she comes because it's awkward to talk to her. As opposed to, no, this is something that I can do. This is something I can contribute to. Helping people understand more about what dementia is and what it isn't, and the many, many ways in which they can just help in small ways that support the person and their family more. So that's to do with building those social attitudes. We have to change the way the media talk about dementia. They often portray it as being, you know, as being a terrible thing, which is like a death sentence and so on, and that's not the whole story by any means.
Yeah, I think the term the suffer, it's still like, it still comes out. I just saw a tweet from the World Health Organization and they use the word suffer, and I just think, oh yes, you know, it's not to say people don't suffer, but it's not, you know, we wouldn't use that term with cancer. We wouldn't say, oh, so and so is suffering from cancer. We'd be like, so and so is fighting cancer, or there's far more positive terms that we'd use with that disease. But with dementia, it's always suffer. And however many times you sort of bring it up, it just still stays as that terms, and that's really unhelpful.
Yeah, I mean, there are other things too, like sometimes I need to illustrate talks, and I need a picture, and I'll sort of go on to websites looking for a picture that would illustrate somebody living with dementia. And actually, when you think about it, that's a really kind of weird thing to do, because people living with dementia are just ordinary people, really, and they look like everybody else. But you know, they're always people who look, you know, really, so they're troubled, and their eyes are down and everything like that. And that's a pity. That's the way the media is educating people to think about people living with dementia, and it's not necessary. So that's one aspect of it. Linked to that then is another aspect of social reserve is how people operate as groups. So what's the experience of a person living with dementia or their family member when they, like, let's say, walk into their church, or they walk into their, I don't know, Women's Institute meeting, or their choir rehearsal, or whatever it might be, or their bridge club, or whatever. How welcoming are people? How understanding are people? To what extent are people sort of distancing themselves? Because one thing we do know is that when somebody's living with dementia, or when somebody's caring for somebody, a lot of the time they can feel really, really isolated. They can feel very much as if they are just out on their own and nobody really is engaging with them anymore. Even, you know, they used to have lots of friends, they used to have places they went, they don't seem to have those. People have fallen away, and that's something that's in everybody's gift to avoid happening. You know, we can all just go that extra mile and remind ourselves that we can reach out to people. But it's also about whether social groups are available, and sometimes, you know, you do need groups that are especially to support people with dementia. Is there a group that they can go to for the inside of a day or something? Is there somewhere a caring family member can go when they need a bit of time off? And making sure that our society is funding local councils, let's say, or that we're donating to charities that will set that kind of thing up, so that those things exist. So there's that. Then there's the whole infrastructure thing, the much bigger thing, which is what is the experience like when you need to get information, when you need to get an appointment with your doctor, which everybody's finding impossible at the moment, when the only way to talk to somebody is by phoning up and then pressing 1, pressing 3, pressing 2, pressing the number you first thought of, whatever it is, this kind of endless kind of complication that seems to keep you away from the things you need to do. How easy do we as a society make it for people living with dementia to actually get very basic jobs done? How easy is it to figure out which bus stop you need? Are you just supposed to know? How easy is it to find your way around a shop, to make sure that you are going to the right place and so on? All of these things are to do with the core infrastructure. How good's the bus service if you can't drive anymore? Do you have to pay for the parking at the hospital or wherever else you're going, and that makes it too expensive to be able to go places? All of these things are parts of our choices in society that we make about what we think is important. And I don't think we think these things are important enough, and we should. So we need to change. We all need to be active in voting for the political parties that favor this, that will do these things, but and voting for the councillors who care about it, and supporting the ideas and going out and finding ways to do things ourselves. These are all really important. And then the final aspect of social reserve is really about giving individuals credibility. It's about believing in them and giving them the opportunity to do the things that they can still do, rather than, sitting them down and saying, oh, I'll do that for you, whatever else, so they feel useless. What can we do to help every single person that we engage with, whether they've got dementia or not, feel that they have a value and that they have something that they can contribute, something that they're an expert in, something where their being there makes a positive difference to other people? And when we're looking at people with a dementia diagnosis, these are people that often, usually older people, they've got a whole life's worth of experience. There are things that they know how to do that younger people don't know how to do. I wish I knew how to make pastry. I reckon there's a lot of people who are living with a dementia diagnosis who can make good pastry still and could show me how to do that. So, why are we wasting that? That's such a pity. So I'd love to see our society finding ways to kind of build people up and demonstrate why they are still of value to us, that we value their experience and all the contributions that they've made through the years to us to make our lives okay, and not kind of push them aside and make them feel they don't matter anymore.
Sort of far more asset-based. What can people still do with that social credibility? Like somebody might not be able to do that, but if they can still do this and this and this, how do we make sure that they still get to do that and don't just get labeled with that? Well, they've got dementia, they can't do anything. Exactly. And I suppose what we've seen with COVID is at least two of these, we've seen the impact of that. So as social groups and infrastructure were massively impacted on by COVID, and the fallout from that was just huge for people affected by dementia, people living with it and those around them, in terms of the support that they could access, the groups that they could go to, their day-to-day life, getting outside the house was very restricted. And we've heard firsthand how people's dementias have got worse and how carers do feel are worse because of that, because those elements weren't there for them. Yeah, exactly. And then also as part of the COVID, that whole thing about people with COVID being discharged into care homes, that's because the people who are making those decisions just didn't think. They just didn't think how vulnerable people are in care homes. And why? How can you not think that? Well, the answer is because their mind's on other things. They can't think of everything, but it's not at the top of their agenda. And that's what social reserve is about, building up these issues so that they're at the top of the agenda, very much in the way that we see is now starting, thank goodness, to happen with climate change. It's much more in people's minds, and that they're realizing that every decision they make actually is contributing to making climate change worse or making things a bit better. And what car shall I buy, that sort of thing. And we need to just get these issues up into people's minds so that they always take that into account. They always, what if, what about, every time. Alison, that was so helpful. Thank you for spending that time just to talk me through those. It's really helped me just to understand them more, and I'm hoping it'll help the people on the courses as well. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.